Chapter 27. Cousin Georgiana came down the lane leading up to her little house. She lived half a mile out of Deerwood and she wanted to go into Amelia's and find out if Doss had come home yet. Cousin Georgiana was anxious to see Doss. She had something very important to tell her. Something, she was sure, Doss would be delighted to hear. Poor Doss. She had rather a dull life of it. Cousin Georgiana owned to herself that she would not like to live under Amelia's thumb. But that would be all. Changed now. Cousin Georgiana felt tremendously important. For the time being, she quite forgot to wonder which of them would go next. And here was Doss herself, coming along the road from Roaring Abel's Inn. Such a queer green dress and hat. Talk about luck. Cousin Georgiana would have a chance to impart her wonderful secret right away, with nobody else about to interrupt. It was, you might say, a providence. Valancy, who had been living for 4 days on her enchanted island, had decided that she might as well go into Deerwood and tell her relatives that she was married. Otherwise, finding that she had disappeared from Roaring Abel's, they might get out a search warrant for her. Barney had offered to drive her in, but she had preferred to go alone. She smiled very radiantly at Cousin Georgiana, who, she remembered, as of someone known a long time ago, had really been not a bad little creature. Valancy was so happy that she could have smiled at anybody, even Uncle James. She was not averse to Cousin Georgiana's company. Already, since the houses along the road were becoming numerous, she was conscious that curious eyes were looking at her from every window. I suppose you're going home, dear Doss, plus or minus, said Cousin Georgiana as she shook hands, furtively eyeing Valancy's dress and wondering if she had any petticoat on at all. Sooner or later, plus or minus, said Valancy cryptically. Then I'll go along with you. I've been wanting to see you very. Especially, Doss dear. I've something quite wonderful to tell you. Plus or minus. Yes, plus or minus, said Valancy absently. What on earth was Cousin Georgiana looking so mysterious and important about? But did it matter? No. Nothing mattered but Barney and the blue castle up back in Mistawis. Who do you suppose called to see me the other day, plus or minus, asked Cousin Georgiana archly. Valancy couldn't guess. Edward Beck. Plus or minus, Cousin Georgiana lowered her voice almost to a whisper. Edward Beck plus or minus. Why the italics? And was Cousin Georgiana blushing? Who on earth is Edward Beck, plus or minus, asked Valancy indifferently. Cousin Georgiana stared. Surely you remember Edward Beck, plus or minus, she said reproachfully. He lives in that lovely house on the Port Lawrence Road and he comes to our church regularly. You must remember him. Plus or minus. Oh, I think I do now, plus or minus, said Valancy, with an effort of memory. That old man with a wen on his forehead and dozens of children, who always sits in the pew by the door, he, plus or minus. Not dozens of children, dear, oh, no, not dozens. Not even _1 dozen. Only 9. At least only 9 that count. The rest are dead. He isn't. Old, he's only about 48, the prime of life, Doss, and what does it matter about a when, plus or minus? Nothing, of course, plus or minus, agreed Valancy quite sincerely. It certainly did not matter to her whether Edward Beck had a when or a dozen whens or no when at all. But Valancy was getting vaguely suspicious. There was certainly an air of suppressed triumph about Cousin Georgiana. Could it be possible that Cousin Georgiana was thinking of marrying again? Marrying Edward Beck? Absurd. Cousin Georgiana was 65 if she were a day, and her little anxious face was as closely covered with fine wrinkles as if she had been 100. But still. Degree, my dear, plus or minus, said Cousin Georgiana. Degree, Edward Beck wants to marry _you _ plus or minus. Valancy stared at Cousin Georgiana for a moment. Then she wanted to go off into a peal of laughter. But she only said, Degree, me, plus or minus. Degree, yes, you. He fell in love with you at the funeral. And he came to consult me about it. I was such a friend of his first wife, you know. He is very much in earnest, Dossie. And it's a wonderful chance for you. He's very well off, and you know, you plus or minus. Degree, am not so young as I once was, plus or minus, agreed Valancy. Degree, to her that half shall be given. Do you really think I would make a good stepmother? Cousin Georgiana, plus or minus. Degree, I am sure you would. You were always so fond of children. Plus or minus. Degree, but 9 is such a family to start with, plus or minus, objected Valancy gravely. Degree, the 2 oldest are grown up and the 3rd almost. That leaves only 6. That really count. And most of them are boys. So much easier to bring up than girls. There's an excellent book, Health Care of the Growing Child. Glades has a copy, I think. It would be such a help to you. And there are books about morals. You'd manage nicely. Of course, I told Mr. Beck that I thought you would woo plus or minus. Degree, jump at him, plus or minus, supplied Valancy. Degree, oh, no, dear. I wouldn't use such an indelicate expression. I told him I thought you would consider his proposal favorably. And you will. 1 dearie, plus or minus. Degree, there's only one obstacle, plus or minus, said Valancy dreamily. Degree, you see, I am married already. Plus or minus. Degree, married, plus or minus. Cousin Georgiana stopped stock still and stared at Valancy. Degree, married, plus or minus. Degree, yes. I was married to Barney Snaith last Tuesday evening in Port Lawrence. Plus or minus. There was a convenient gatepost hard by. Cousin Georgiana took firm hold of it. Degree, Doss, dear, I am an old woman. Are you trying to make fun of me, plus or minus? Degree, not at all. I am only telling you the truth. For heaven's sake, Cousin Georgiana, plus or minus. Valancy was alarmed by certain symptoms. Degree, don't go crying here on the public road, plus or minus. Cousin Georgiana choked back the tears and gave a little moan of despair instead. Degree, oh, Doss, what have you done? What have you done, plus or minus? Degree, I've just been telling you. I've got married, plus or minus, said Valancy, calmly and patiently. Degree, to that Barney Snaith _ Why, they say he's had a dozen wives already. Plus or minus. Degree, I am the only one round at present, plus or minus, said Valancy. Degree, what will your poor mother say, plus or minus, moaned Cousin Georgiana. Degree, come along with me and hear, if you want to know, plus or minus, said Valancy. Degree, I am on my way to tell her now. Plus or minus. Cousin Georgiana let go the gatepost cautiously and found that she could stand alone. She meekly trotted on beside Valancy, who suddenly seemed quite a different person in her eyes. Cousin Georgiana had a tremendous respect for a married woman. But it was terrible to think of what the poor girl had done. So rash. So reckless. Of course Valancy must be stark mad. But she seemed so happy in her madness that Cousin Georgiana had a momentary conviction that it would be a pity if the Clan tried to scold her back to sanity. She had never seen that look in Valency's eyes before. But what would Amelia say? And Ben? Degree to marry a man you know nothing about, plus or minus, thought Cousin Georgiana. Aloud. Degree, I know more about him than I know of Edward Beck, plus or minus, said Valency. Degree Edward Beck goes to church plus or minus, said Cousin Georgiana. Degree does your husband, plus or minus. Degree, he has promised that he will go with me on fine Sundays, plus or minus, said Valency. When they turned in at the Sterling gate, Valency gave an exclamation of surprise. Degree, look at my rosebush. Why, it's blooming, plus or minus. It was covered with blossoms. Great, crimson, velvety blossoms. Fragrant. Glowing. Wonderful. Degree, my cutting it to pieces must have done it good, plus or minus, said Valency. Laughing. She gathered a handful of the blossoms, they would look well on the supper table of the veranda at Mistawi's, and went, still laughing, up the walk, conscious that Olive was standing on the steps. Olive, goddess-like in loveliness, looking down with a slight frown on her forehead. Olive, beautiful, insolent. Her full form voluptuous in its swathings of rose silk and lace. Her golden brown hair curling richly under her big, white-frilled hat. Her color ripe and melting. Degree beautiful, plus or minus, thought Valency coolly, Degree but plus or minus, as if she suddenly saw her cousin through new eyes, Degree, without the slightest touch of distinction. Plus or minus. So Valency had come home, thank goodness, thought Olive. But Valency was not looking like a repentant, returned prodigal. This was the cause of Olive's frown. She was looking triumphant, graceless. That outlandish dress, that queer hat, those hands full of blood-red roses. Yet there was something about both dress and hat, as Olive instantly felt, that was entirely lacking in her own attire. This deepened the frown. She put out a condescending hand. Degree, so you re back, das? Very warm day, isn't it? Did you walk in, plus or minus? Degree, yes. Coming in, plus or minus? Degree, oh, no. I've just been in. I've come often to comfort poor auntie. She's been so lonesome. I am going to Mrs. Bartlett's tea. I have to help poor. She's giving it for her cousin from Toronto. Such a charming girl. You'd have loved meeting her, das. I think Mrs. Bartlett did send you a card. Perhaps you'll drop in later on. Plus or minus. Degree, no, I don't think so, plus or minus, said Valency indifferently. Degree, I'll have to be home to get Barney's supper. We going for a moonlit canoe ride around Mistawi's tonight. Plus or minus. Degree, Barney? Supper, plus or minus, gasped Olive. Degree, what do you mean, Valency Sterling, plus or minus? Degree, Valency Snaith, by the grace of God. Plus or minus. Valency flaunted her wedding ring in Olive's stricken face. Then she nimbly stepped past her and into the house. Cousin Georgiana followed. She would not miss a moment of the great scene, even though Olive did look as if she were going to faint. Olive did not faint. She went stupidly down the street to Mrs. Bartlett's what did das mean? She couldn't have that ring. Oh, what fresh scandal was that wretched girl bringing on her defenseless family? Now? She should have been shut up long ago. Valency opened the sitting room door and stepped unexpectedly right into a grim assemblage of Sterlings. They had not come together of malice prepense. Aunt Wellington and Cousin Gladys and Aunt Mildred and Cousin Sarah had just called in on their way home from a meeting of the Missionary Society. Uncle James had dropped in to give Amelia some information regarding a doubtful investment. Uncle Benjamin had called, apparently, to tell them it was a hot day and ask them what was the difference between a bee and a donkey. Cousin Stickles had been tactless enough to know the answer. Degree 1 gets all the honey, the other all the wax, plus or minus, and Uncle Benjamin was in a bad humor. In all of their minds, unexpressed, was the idea of finding out if Valancy had yet come home, and, if not, what steps must be taken in the matter. Well, here was Valancy at last, a poised, confident thing, not humble and deprecating as she should have been. And so oddly, improperly young-looking. She stood in the doorway and looked at them, Cousin Georgiana timorous, expectant, behind her. Valancy was so happy she didn't hate her people anymore. She could even see a number of good qualities in them that she had never seen before. And she was sorry for them. Her pity made her quite gentle. Degree well, mother, plus or minus, she said pleasantly. Degree so you've come home at last, plus or minus, said Mrs. Frederick, getting out a handkerchief. She dared not be outraged, but she did not mean to be cheated of her tears. Degree well, not exactly, plus or minus, said Valancy. She threw her bomb. Degree I thought I ought to drop in and tell you I was married last Tuesday night. 2. Barney Snaith. Plus or minus. Uncle Benjamin bounced up and sat down again. Degree God bless my soul, plus or minus, he said dully. The rest seemed turned to stone. Except Cousin Gladys, who turned faint. Aunt Mildred and Uncle Wellington had to help her out to the kitchen. Degree she would have to keep up the Victorian traditions, plus or minus, said Valancy. With a grin. She sat down, uninvited, on a chair. Cousin Stickles had begun to sob. Degree is there _1 day in your life that you haven't cried, plus or minus, asked Valancy curiously. Degree Valancy, plus or minus, said Uncle James, being the first to recover the power of utterance. Degree, did you mean what you said just now, plus or minus? Degree I did. Plus or minus. Degree, do you mean to say that you have actually gone and married that notorious Barney Snaith, that criminal, that plus or minus? Degree I have. Plus or minus. Degree then, plus or minus, said Uncle James violently. Degree you are a shameless creature, lost to all sense of propriety and virtue, and I wash my hands entirely of you. I do not want ever to see your face again. Plus or minus. Degree what have you left to say when I commit murder, plus or minus, asked Valancy. Uncle Benjamin again appealed to God to bless his soul. Degree that drunken outlaw, that plus or minus. A dangerous spark appeared in Valancy's eyes. They might say what they liked to and of her, but they should not abuse Barney. Degree say damn and you feel better, plus or minus, she suggested. Degree, I can express my feelings without blasphemy. And I tell you have covered yourself with eternal disgrace and infamy by marrying that drunkard, plus or minus. Degree _you_ would be more endurable if you got drunk occasionally. Barney is not a drunkard. Plus or minus. Degree, he was seen drunk in Port Lawrence, pickled to the gills, plus or minus, said Uncle Benjamin. Degree, if that is true, and I don't believe it, he had a good reason for it. Now I suggest that you all stop looking tragic and accept the situation. I am married, you can undo that. And I am perfectly happy. Plus or minus. Degree, I suppose we ought to be thankful he has really married her, plus or minus, said Cousin Sarah, by way of trying to look on the bright side. Degree if he really has, plus or minus, said Uncle James, who had just washed his hands of Valancy. Degree who married you, plus or minus. Degree Mr. Towers, of Port Lawrence. Plus or minus. Degree by a free Methodist, plus or minus groaned Mrs. Frederick as if to have been. Married by an imprisoned Methodist would have been a shade less disgraceful. It was the first thing she had said. Mrs. Frederick didn't know what to say. The whole thing was too horrible, too nightmarish. She was sure she must wake up soon. After all their bright hopes at the funeral. Degree, it makes me think of those what do ye call EMS, plus or minus, said Uncle Benjamin. Helplessly. Degree, those yarns, you know, of fairies taking babies out of their cradles, plus or minus. Degree, Valancy could hardly be a changeling at 29, plus or minus, said Aunt Wellington, satirically. Degree, she was the oddest-looking baby I ever saw, anyway, plus or minus, averred Uncle Benjamin. Degree, I said so at the time, you remember, Amelia? I said I had never seen such eyes in a human head. Plus or minus. Degree, I am glad I never had any children, plus or minus, said Cousin Sarah. Degree, if they break your heart in one way they do it in another. Plus or minus. Degree, it better to have your heart broken than to have it wither up, plus or minus. Queried Valancy. Degree, before it could be broken it must have felt something splendid. That would be worth the pain. Plus or minus. Degree, dippy, clean dippy, plus or minus, muttered Uncle Benjamin, with a vague, unsatisfactory feeling that somebody had said something like that before. Degree, Valancy, plus or minus, said Mrs. Frederick solemnly. Degree, do you ever pray to be forgiven for disobeying your mother, plus or minus? Degree, I should pray to be forgiven for obeying you so long, plus or minus, said Valancy stubbornly. Degree, but I don't pray about that at all. I just thank God every day for my happiness. Plus or minus. Degree, I would rather, plus or minus, said Mrs. Frederick, beginning to cry rather belatedly. Degree, see you dead before me than listen to what you have told me today. Plus or minus. Valancy looked at her mother and aunts, and wondered if they could ever have known anything of the real meaning of love. She felt sorrier for them than ever. They were so very pitiable. And they never suspected it. Degree, Barney Snaith is a scoundrel to have deluded you into marrying him, plus or minus, said Uncle James violently. Degree, I did the deluding. I asked him to marry me, plus or minus, said Valancy with a wicked smile. Degree, have you no pride, plus or minus, demanded Aunt Wellington. Degree, lots of it. I am proud that I have achieved a husband by my own unaided efforts. Cousin Georgiana here wanted to help me to Edward Beck. Plus or minus. Degree, Edward Beck is worth $20,000 and has the finest house between here and Port Lawrence, plus or minus, said Uncle Benjamin. Degree, that sounds very fine, plus or minus, said Valancy scornfully. Degree, but it isn't worth that degree. She snapped her fingers. Degree compared to feeling Barney's arms around me and his cheek against mine. Plus or minus. Degree, DOS, plus or minus, said Cousin Stickles. Cousin Sarah said, Degree, DOS, plus or minus. Aunt Wellington said, Degree, Valancy, you need not be indecent. Plus or minus. Degree, why, it's surely isn't indecent to like to have your husband put his arm around you? I should think it would be indecent if you didn't. Plus or minus. Degree, why expect decency from her, plus or minus, inquired Uncle James sarcastically. Degree, she has cut herself off from decency forevermore. She has made her bed. Let her lie on it. Plus or minus. Degree, thanks, plus or minus, said Valancy very gratefully. Degree, how you would have enjoyed being Torquemada. Now, I must really be getting back. Mother, may I have those 3 woolen cushions I worked last winter, plus or minus. Degree, take them, take everything, plus or minus, said Mrs. Frederick. Degree, oh, I don't want everything or much. I don't want my blue castle. Cluttered. Just the cushions. I'll call for them someday when we motor. In plus or minus. Valancy rose and went to the door. There she turned. She was sorrier than ever for them all. They had no blue castle in the purple solitudes of Mestawis. Degree, the trouble with you people is that you don't laugh enough, plus or minus, she said. Degree, das, dear, plus or minus, said Cousin Georgiana mournfully. Degree, someday you will discover that blood is thicker than water. Plus or minus. Degree, of course it is. But who wants water to be thick, plus or minus, parried Valancy. Degree, we want water to be thin, sparkling, crystal clear. Plus or minus. Cousin Stickles groaned. Valancy would not ask any of them to come and see her, she was afraid. They would come out of curiosity. But she said. Degree, do you mind if I drop in and see you once in a while, mother, plus or minus? Degree, my house will always be open to you, plus or minus, said Mrs. Frederick, with a mournful dignity. Degree, you should never recognize her again, plus or minus, said Uncle James sternly, as the door closed behind Valancy. Degree, I cannot quite forget that I am a mother, plus or minus, said Mrs. Frederick. Degree, my poor, unfortunate girl, plus or minus. Degree, I dare say the marriage isn't legal, plus or minus, said Uncle James comfortingly. Degree, he has probably been married half a dozen times before. But I am through with her. I have done all I could, Amelia. I think you will admit that. Henceforth, plus or minus, Uncle James was terribly solemn about it. Degree, Valancy is to me as one dead. Plus or minus. Degree, Mrs. Barney Snaith, plus or minus, said Cousin Georgiana, as if trying it out to see how it would sound. Degree, he has a score of aliases, no doubt, plus or minus, said Uncle Benjamin. Degree, for my part, I believe the man is half Indian. I haven't a doubt they living in a wigwam. Plus or minus. Degree, if he has married her under the name of Snaith and at his real name wound that make the marriage null and void, plus or minus, asked Cousin Stickles hopefully. Uncle James shook his head. Degree, no, it is the man who marries, not the name. Plus or minus. Degree, you know, plus or minus, said Cousin Gladys, who had recovered and returned but was still shaky. Degree, I had a distinct premonition of this at Herbert S. Silver dinner. I remarked it at the time when she was defending Snaith. You remember, of course. It came over me like a revelation. I spoke to David when I went home about it. Plus or minus. Degree, what underscore, plus or minus, demanded Aunt Wellington of the universe. Degree has come over. Valancy? Valancy, plus or minus. The universe did not answer, but Uncle James did. Degree, there's something coming up of late about secondary personalities cropping out? I don't hold with many of those newfangled notions, but there may be something in this one. It would account for her incomprehensible conduct. Plus or minus. Degree, Valancy is so fond of mushrooms, plus or minus, sighed Cousin Georgiana. Degree, I am afraid she'll get poisoned eating toadstools, by mistake, living up back in the woods. Plus or minus. Degree, there are worse things than death, plus or minus, said Uncle James, believing that it was the first time in the world that such a statement had been made. Degree, nothing can ever be the same again, plus or minus, sobbed Cousin Stickles. Valancy, hurrying along the dusty road, back to cool Mestawis and her Purple Island, had forgotten all about them, just as she had forgotten that she might drop dead at any moment if she hurried.